let's kick things off. I'm going to leave you the scene, Christopher, just to present us the results of your latest findings. And I think you have a presentation to share to everyone.
Yep.
And then the first time every of the panelists is going to be presented, I'm going to introduce you a bit more seriously. Christopher, do I need to introduce you, or does everybody know Christopher Guesson?
Everyone ought to know who the hell I am, so I won't have any introduction. But anyways, let me put my screen on and share it with you all. So this is what we're talking about, urgency and opportunity. This is actually Dave's idea. He, I guess, had been sort of seeing it as he'd been investing and talking to all the companies that they invest in at XPV water companies, that water partners, that, you know, the money is moving, but it's mainly moving where there's a sort of urgency, and that is sort of creating opportunities. And just sort of to go back to sort of think about the sort of backstory here. We started, I guess, 2 years ago, publishing this chart with XPV, showing how we thought the sort of capital employed in water would evolve between 2024 and 2034. And you can see we were wanting to have this sort of huge expansion in order to address the problems that we saw on the horizon. And I guess that white paper also was the first to really establish the relationship between sort of the losses and the water cycle relating to climate change. And essentially we were arguing that something like 69% of the sort of impact of climate change falls on the water cycle, on the basis of the sort of analysis of insurance losses. Anyway, what we're sort of getting to now is that this is really how the sort of pattern of spending is evolving. That you know, we got this sort of increased drought intensity, we've got the sort of extreme flood risk and growing public concerns, and these three things are then sort of interacting with sort of decades of underinvestment in infrastructure to create the kind of crises which makes sort of investment urgent. And I guess that what we're seeing is that there's sort of four main sort of high growth themes that are coming out of this. And, you know, you could say that this is the sort of early stage response to the crisis that we're in. And, you know, the first one is flexibility. And, you know, this is, you know, I mean, in some areas, you know, it's about mobile solutions, and we've recently just published analysis of that market. But also, you know, taking, you know, upgrading existing infrastructure or changing existing infrastructure so that it can work for a new purpose or whatever. And, you know, it's essentially what one's saying there is that grey infrastructure is typically built for decades, i.e. that the investment case is justified on the basis of decades of use. But it's very difficult to establish the sort of actuarial basis for decades of use in the current circumstances. So what people are looking for is essentially quick fixes that aren't committing them to massive expenditure just now. And then agility. I mean, here tools that will enable you, I mean, essentially to get more from the existing infrastructure. That's, you know, although it's obviously an investment to start investing in these data-driven tools, in the longer term, they reduce the amount of grey infrastructure you might need to build in response to these kinds of crises. Then there's sort of credibility, and I think that this is, you know, comes out of the whole sort of public concern issue, which is really building. And I think this is something which is happening in every geography. I mean, you could see it as, you know, the flip side of some of these sort of environmental conspiracy theories that you know, some of the new administration in America get excited about. But what one's saying here is that, you know, the public are starting to care a hell of a lot more of what's in their water, and also what's you know, what the wastewater is going into the environment. And there's a sort of much, you know, the political response to that is to, you know, look for greater transparency. And, you know, there's this need to build trust or rebuild trust between the sort of public and water agencies. And sort of monitoring analytics is one area where that can happen. And the fourth area is availability. I mean, this is, you know, obviously a very sort of long-running theme. You know, technologies that can guarantee water supply regardless of natural freshwater limits. Here we're talking largely about desalination and water reuse, and, you know, these things are taking off. Now, if we go to look at what it all adds up to, I mean, in terms of you know, the main drivers, the sort of drought trends, increased numbers of droughts in non-arid regions, which, you know, that's creating this sense that actually water secure, and that, particularly on the industrial water side, the businesses have to worry a lot more about, you know, their water risk in their business and water security in these regions in a way that they probably didn't in the past. And then you've got these places which, as a result of climate change, have been seeing longer term trends in towards greater aridity. So, you know, Western Australia, the monsoon seems to sort of miss the continent. You know, similarly, the rainfall patterns in Southern Africa seem to have changed in the long term, and in the American West. And in the sort of looking at floods, I mean, this is just taking data for the number of major flood events a year, and seeing how these have been sort of growing. And, you know, as I said, it's interesting. I mean, when, you know, I was, you know, talking to the sort of NASA increase in floods and droughts, you know, they said, well, yes, you can see it happening, but, you know, you really need to have 100 years. 1 degree extra on temperature gives you so much more flooding and droughts, and you know, that creates a problem. You know, without that sort of you know, actuarial evidence, it's very difficult for people to be knowing exactly what they should be investing in. And then finally, we got the public concern, where we got the sort of all these different issues, which you know, the public in different parts of the world have been getting much more engaged in than they were in the past. And, you know, the public seem to, you know, and the politicians and the water agencies respond to this. So what does it mean in market terms? So what we're saying is that, you know, within these themes, we're seeing, you know, within the sort of flexibility theme, we've got sort of 37% rise. I mean, the actual figure that we're looking at to describe that market is actually mobile water, but we think it probably is quite similar when you compare that to other things such as, you know, these sort of fixes, upgrades and retrofits to change the what the existing infrastructure does. So that seems to, the mobile figure seems to reflect that. Agility, we're looking at the sort of digital systems, and again, that's growing, more than twice as fast as the market overall. Credibility, this is the sort of water quality analytics and so forth. And finally, there's the availability piece, which we've known for some time has been growing, and that's going to continue to grow. And I think that it's a slightly different thing driving that, in that historically the availability market has largely been driven by the Middle East and sort of North Africa, and a bit on Chile and Western Australia, where you have very, very dry places which need water 24/7. But the market for availability is now a much more temporary market. And I don't think that we've really worked out what the business model is to deliver water on a temporary basis to where it's needed. Anyway, just finally, going back to that original picture of the thing, you can see the increase that we need to get from here to there is nowhere near where we need. We're not on track to do that. But I guess that this is, part of the original argument is that, we do need to have a much broader engagement to get this to happen. And, we're looking to look at this, looking at this engagement in the Global Water Summit, where delivering the water transition is going to be the theme this year. And this transition is really about getting from here to here, with first and foremost getting the finance thing fixed. We've got quite we're involved launching their new mission for water. There we'll be bringing in some of the people involved in the UN push in finance as well, and getting the industrial water sector much more involved in this water security issue, and doing that in partnership more with so when we're talking about the water transition, we're talking about going from a world of sort of competition for resources to one of collaboration for resources, one sort of dominated by grey infrastructure to green infrastructure, dumb infrastructure to smart infrastructure. I think there are a couple of other themes we'll have to go along to the conference to enjoy that. But anyway, I'll stop my presentation there and we can move back to the discussion.
I have actually a direct question which follows that, which reflects to what we discussed 2 years ago when we published this $13.8 trillion, because there was a question about, yeah, but how does that reflect in your own projections of the market? And you explain how it doesn't really.
Well, this is the thing.
Exactly, that was going to be the thing.
Yeah. So what we're, you're quite right. When we produce that thing, but this is what we were saying, right? This is what the capital base that we will need in place in order to address the challenges that will be there by 2034. And we have a sort of duty as somebody who provides, organization providing more market forecasts to be realistic. We can't just say the market is going to grow, 6 times faster than it actually is, based on the information that we have. But we're also an actor in the business, so we are sort of cheerleaders to make this happen. But what we're saying is that we are seeing an uptick, but the uptick is focused in these areas, which are around those 4 themes at the moment. But but it doesn't necessarily make sense in the long term, because some of these quick fixes and mobile solutions and relying on digital things rather than having the more expensive longer term investment. It's actually cheaper to do the more expensive longer term investment in the long term. But the problem is we're in the short term at the moment. And what we're sort of feeling is that probably the biggest obstacle to the long term investment that's needed is this sense of uncertainty. And this sense of uncertainty, I think, is being underlined by the politics of the situation. So, when you have a number of people thinking, okay, the Trump administration is opposed to climate, therefore there is nothing happening in the water cycle. Well, clearly that's not true. We do know that the frequency and severity of droughts and the frequency and severity of floods has increased. Now, we could say that it was caused by little green men if we wanted, but that's the thing that we're having to, the water sector is having to respond to, and this difficulty of establishing the sort of statistical record, so that people can say, okay, this is definitely what's going to happen. We've historically, for example, people would say, we need to plan for plan our infrastructure for a 100-year flood or a 100-year drought. But if these 100-year droughts or floods are going to happen every 12 years or something, which seems to be the case in some places, it's very difficult to justify the spend just now until it's clear what the actual situation is. I'm sure John probably has some sort of insight into that from his perspective. But anyway, I'll finish that.
Just before we jump to that, I'd just like to have one understanding, because you said that you, Dave, triggered Christopher to look at that and look into urgency. And I'm wondering, let me introduce you shortly for people who would not know you. But again, like Christopher, you're very known in that sector. You're the managing partner at XPV Water Partners. And I think you crossed last year the $1 billion of assets under management. And I'm wondering, that urgency, is it a call to arm? Is it what you're seeing in the markets? Or is it a disconnect which you want to fill with information so that everybody feels the urgency you're feeling?
I would actually say it's definitely what we're seeing in the market. And I think Christopher has written about this, and I've certainly talked about it, and keep it in simple terms. I think we moved from sort of out of sight, out of mind water issues to in your face. And it's in your face in boardrooms, in, communities, political committees, so it's sort of now one of those risks and opportunities that people are talking about every day. And that changes things. And I'll take a step back. One of the reasons why we thought through and think about flexibility, agility, credibility, and availability is at XPV, we started off with a water security framework. So we think there's three big buckets. If we want a water secure world, we all got to go after and resolve. And that is water availability. And by the way, that's too much and too little. They're both equally bad. There's water process efficiency. Yes, most of the infrastructure in the water world was built many years ago and is not flexible and quite inefficient in terms of what it needs to do today. And then the final one is water quality. And when we say water quality, we mean the quality of the chemistry going into a process, the quality of the chemistry during a process, and then the quality of the chemistry going out of the process. So we think those are the three big areas. And where flexibility, agility, and credibility and availability come into play is they're cross-cutting themes across all of those. And we start to look at the actual solutions. And so I think it's a combination of these. And certainly, if you were to dig through our portfolio, if you look at our historical investments that have done well, you're going to see these themes for sure pop up as one of the reasons why they're being successful.
I think without revealing too much secrets, we will have an example from your portfolio in just a second, if I, again, on my screen right here. But before that,
she's right here for me.
Okay. On your map, Christopher, we had some hotspots like yellow, blue, and one of these hotspots was, I think, exactly where you sit, John. So Dave was just speaking of too much, too little, and public concern. To me, you would be exactly at the too much, too little, because you had the two extremes. So how did that change in your recent experience? What Christopher just explained, this transition from a sentinel event can now happen every 12 years and things are accelerating.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Antoine. That's a great question. So for those of you viewing this webinar, so I'm in Tucson, Arizona. It's in the American Southwest, just about less than 100 miles north of the Mexican border. We're in the Sonoran Desert. So our climate here is very dry, but it's still a green desert. But we do receive less than 12 inches of rain a year. So we're still considered a desert. Tucson is historically a groundwater system, one of the United States' largest groundwater systems. We don't have any flowing surface waters anymore. So we've traditionally grown up on over-pumping groundwater in the 20th century. What we've done in the last several decades, and I think this has helped us as a utility, is we've actually discovered some of our crises in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And so we've been very intentional and deliberate in being flexible in our planning and being agile, building credibility with the community on how we're going to be able to manage for the next 100 years with our water supply. We're very much connected, though, to the Colorado River. So even though we do receive a lot of surface water, we do aquifer recharge, and that was to hedge against drought conditions in the basin here in the Colorado River Basin. So we've been banking our water, turning it into groundwater, and using it as we need. So a lot of different flexible options we've had in Tucson, but we're also dealing with historic water quality issues of our groundwater system, which has made the focus of the utility by the general public and maintaining that credibility and serving clean water just that much more important. And I know we're going to talk about that in a little bit.
You were mentioning the quality. I saw you in panels discussing that element because it's somewhat counterintuitive. You are in an area where you would think the primary driver is we don't have enough water. And it sounds to me like the water quality element is almost more important because it's not worth having water if it's not quality water. So what is that pressure you feel from the public as the director of Tucson Water?
Yeah, and that's exactly right. Both of them go hand in hand. And those are the two questions that people in the general public ask. Do we have enough water to survive? And the answer is yes. And is our water safe to drink? And the answer is yes. So I have to, and our utility and our city leadership have to answer those two questions all the time, because that it's in your face. When you're in a desert environment, you're already living in a crisis already when it comes to water supply. So the comfort that businesses, people moving here, and all that investment happening in the southwestern U.S. and in the Tucson area, they need to feel reassured. They need to feel a level of comfort that the water supply is sound from a quality and from a drinking, from a resource perspective.
I feel like that's the connection to you, Ellie, because it's almost your business proposition to say that we have to address that credibility issue and we have to understand what is happening so that we can be transparent at all levels. What is the main problem in that area which you're addressing at Metron? And how do you fuel that with your data eye?
Great question. So I'm Ellie Grayson. I'm the Chief Data Product Officer at Metron. We collect a lot of water data, first off. So we deploy AMI or smart meter systems for water systems and for water municipalities and utilities. We do a lot of work both on the utility side and on the real estate and commercial side. And part of the reason I bring that forward is that those different kinds of use cases really have a very different set of users and people who are trying to understand the information. So I think where this really connects is in how we communicate data back to the people who are trying to make decisions. I did a lot of work in emergency management before floods, wildfires, and so forth. It's not a dissimilar problem. What we're trying to do is collect a lot of information about how the real world works. What is happening in the physical world around us? How do we understand that from the perspective of the climate changes, the soil conditions, right? We can think about saturation for flood risk. We can actually also think about drought as a flood risk because you end up with hydrophobic soils. You then start to think about how we collect data about our infrastructure systems that sit within those physical and sort of natural world systems. So that's things like IoT deployment meters, all across, say, the city of Tucson, where you can actually now understand at each individual point who is using how much water, when, where, and for what. And what that allows us to then do is really start to understand across the whole system what the impacts are going to be upstream to downstream, what happens when you get a water main break, what happens when you have a concern about quality in one part of the city, but that doesn't have an impact on the other. Where that all comes together is in how we aggregate and collect that information and then communicate it out to the public. At the end of the day, people want information, but they may or may not think about it as a data problem. What they're thinking about is, do I have the information I need and what do I do differently about it? So what we do at Metron is tell them a lot about their own personal water use and give them access to visualization platforms that are different from what a utility director needs. John is a water expert through and through. John is going to be able to internalize and make decisions on the basis of the information he's seeing at a level of sophistication that as a homeowner, I may well not be, or as a property manager, I may not be. But if you tell me how much money I'm saving by fixing a leak or by, and little things, a flapper in your toilet, it's not even just the big things. There is also in California and certainly in Tucson, a lot of regulations and restrictions on outdoor watering. That's where we can also start to give a lot of people information about how they're using the water, how they're using it differentially, and how they're then going to change their own price point by changing their behavior. So when it really comes back to the data side of this, it's how do we collect all of this data? Make sure that they make sense, make sure that they're validated on our side. How do we use the most advanced analytics, statistics, AI, but in a trustworthy way? But then most importantly, get that information into the hands of the people, the individuals, in a way that makes sense intuitively to them. If we show them error bars with 3 orders of magnitude difference, they're not going to know what to do with that information. But if we tell them, hey, your bill just went up by $45 this month, all of a sudden that starts to change their behavior. So I think that's where this really matters a lot. Just one quick side note, you certainly see this in conversations about data centers and those sorts of things as well. So this translates not just to from the micro, but to the macro.
Let's not open that Pandora box, because if we go on that sidetrack, we're going to be there for the next, the best part of the second half of that webinar. I want to build upon one of the questions received in the chat, because I believe that's a curveball and an interesting transition to how to address these new realm. It's a question from Alexander Lukopoulos from Science, who's asking, given that most US water systems are municipally owned and ratepayer affordability is already a binding constraint, where do you actually see that capital formation happening? Are you assuming a fundamental shift in how water infrastructure gets financed? So I guess what he's addressing here is your opening chart, Christopher, with that needs, and where I'd like to use that question as the transition to where we're heading is the traditional way is to build on static data and with ratepayer money, and to build infrastructure that goes in the ground, hopefully for the next 70 years or century. What Alex is suggesting here is that maybe part of this evolution towards this agility, flexibility, which you were discussing in the opening, is maybe blended capital, delegation of who does what, and different approaches. First, John, is that like a terrible idea, and you would never do that because you're, sorry, pardon my French, shit at Tucson Water, and you don't need that blended approach?
No, I think it's when you're looking at investment, particularly at a municipal scale in the United States, you have to have some earned trust with your ratepayers to be able to make those long-term decisions. But you got to be, and what we do here in Tucson is, and what's very successful is we look at scalability a lot. We've changed that over the years. We're not looking for grandiose gigantic plans that are going to involve hundreds of millions of dollars of capital. We're looking at scalable solutions that will work for us in the future and can be easily translated with our ratepayer community. Where that also helps us with the ratepayer community is that level of information going back and forth. Because one of the key elements that we found in not having to be investing large amounts of capital into large infrastructure projects are demand strategies. And so our demand strategies, like Dr. was just mentioning, is if your customers start to change their behavior because you empowered them with information and they change how much water they're using and whether you need to invest more in resource acquisition or water quality concerns that'll drive you to different parts of your environment, the demand strategy can actually prolong those large investments that you might have to do. And it might be long enough where you can pivot and a new technology might come around that actually might be cheaper than what you originally thought of in your original capital planning strategy. Hopefully that's answered.
So it sounds like, oh, please.
Point to that. I just wanted to also underscore exactly to John's point, we're not, as the new technology is developing and as we sort of step into this AI world, that's where we are with digitization, getting a lot more bang for our buck. And we're doing that on the hardware side too, where we're starting to see across the whole industry, this isn't just our company, but it is ours as well. We're sort of decoupling some of the hardware where you can now, instead of replacing a whole meter, you can actually go in and just replace the register or just add in some new IoT communications mechanisms. So it's allowing us to sort of decouple, which then makes each individual replacement piece less expensive.
Getting exactly where I thought you would. So thanks a lot for that. Because it's the two sides of the same thing. Flexibility, agility is awesome, but it's also if people start to be much more nimble and react much faster, then that means the utility of the future has to adapt to the flexibility and agility on steroids, which is happening at industrial scale, at for individual people scale. So how do you ensure that this is like a positive loop and not you're running after and you need to catch up with what's happening?
Yeah.
I guess it's a question for both of you, the tool and the user of the tool.
Yeah, you have to be out there. I've mentioned this before. The 21st century is no place to be timid in water management and utility leadership. You have to be in front of your public as much as possible. You have to take every invitation to every business group, to every school function, and to tell your story and to tell the information related to your water and what your planning is. Because in the world of social media, if you're a utility and you're not continuously telling your story, somebody's going to tell your story for you, and then you're not going to be able to control the message. And as soon as you lose control of the message, you're not going to have that credibility for your next tariff increase or rate changes that you want your community to support you on. So you have to be present, you have to be out there, and you have to keep your community informed as much as possible.
All set, Antoine, go for it.
Go for it. I didn't want to cut you.
Oh no, I was just building on that. I think there's this moment, the water industry doesn't move quickly, but partly because we are, in some ways, we were slow to come into the digitization world and into sort of digital transformation. What that means in practice is that I'm watching a lot of utilities make a leap, right? They didn't necessarily do the sort of hop on the bandwagon, go to the cloud early, around 2010. What they're now doing, 10, 15 years ahead is saying, okay, we can actually skip ahead to the AI world, and we can actually pull those data forward, start to run a lot of the analysis at scale using these new tools. And we're actually really well positioned to move, I think, a little more quickly as well. And I'm seeing real interest and willingness to really step into that new world, especially as AMI systems are really becoming de facto the way to go. And it's and I'm watching a lot of of utilities. We work a lot in the small and rural utility markets, small, medium. And even those small groups are really seeing the value of going to AMI systems, and because they have the data now to run their whole system end to end. And I think we're now at this moment where when you can pull all of those data together and really analyze them at scale, utilities are stepping in a wholly new way, exactly as John was describing, and it's really exciting to see.
Okay, that was the rosy pink, everything is well and everything goes right side of the story. Let me look at the dark side with two questions again from our questions tab, which go to both of you, Christopher and Dave, because I think those are the recurring topic I've heard at the Global Water Summit over the years. So I think you probably have an articulated answer to that. The first question is, both questions are from John Paul. That's why I'm putting them together. The first is, does your financing forecast include use of catalytic capital to get the development stage of a project to the point of defining risk and cost, which is something I've heard a lot over the Global Water Summits, as of how do you de-risk the early stages of a project and how do you use the right capital at the right stage? And the second question, and pairing with that, is we are seeing all those big numbers getting larger and the risk getting larger and the tension getting larger and bigger. To the question, do you expect a strong customer use response from information engagement or from accurate economic signaling, in extenso increasing tariffs to reflect the actual cost to supply the water? I think if you haven't said at every Global Water Summit, water is too cheap, Christopher, I would eat a rat. So, what's your answer?
Let me sort of look at this in two different ways. I mean, I think that there's sort of two worlds. I mean, there's what's happening in the US and what happens in Europe, and then I guess other places. So I think in the US, there needs to be an understanding. America needs probably to go through the same process that Australia went through 15 years ago, when suddenly the Australia, during their millennium drought, they realized that water was going to have to be a hell of a lot more expensive. And there was a change in the personnel in Australia's water sector to reflect this. And instead of having engineers and people who've traditionally been very happy to be working out of sight and just thinking there's enough reward just for the water to come out of the tap and people turn it on, and not being seen is good, to having a lot more sort of marketing people right at the top of the whole thing, and making this idea of raising the tariffs just a huge part of the mission of the utility. And I think that I think some utilities in America have been quite good at this. And looking at our tariff survey, you'll see it's been relatively effective at increasing tariffs on the wastewater side over the past few years. But really, I mean, there needs to be a much stronger communication from the water sector that this is actually serious now, this needs to happen, because I mean, we've got this wonderful window in the world now in America, and we've launched this product, Win Water Projects, which allows us to listen into all the council meetings where people are discussing what's happening in water. And this question of you can ask Win Water Projects because it has a chatbot front end. You can ask it, what are people saying about affordability in council meetings now? And how are they dealing with it? And it then spits out an answer of all the different ways that people are responding. And clearly there's a lot of aching around the problem that in the US it's very difficult to get cross subsidy between rich people and poor people, but you may be able to squeeze something between industrial and domestic if you're lucky. And I mean, it's sort of interesting. I mean, there are 4 utilities that were listed in the response when I asked about this, who were saying that they were looking to smart meters to solve the problem. In that, by metering better, they thought they could actually increase their revenues substantially, and this would offset the cost of the investment that they needed to do elsewhere. And anyway, so that's a sort of a look at the US side. More generally, I mean, I think, on this problem of, getting projects off the ground, particularly in countries which have very low tariffs, and, the massive investment that's needed in, low and middle income countries to avoid a sort of some kind of water catastrophe over the next few years. I mean, that's why I've been sort of spending a lot of time in the past year getting involved in the UN water process. We, we had a meeting, a UN meeting last month in Dakar, where one of the main things which I was sort of gunning for, we managed to sort of get them to agree to, which is to sort of start building a platform for the private sector to engage with the UN water process, because hitherto all the NGOs and civil society groups have been very happy shouting their heads off at the UN, and the UN takes it very seriously. But the people who actually are needed to deliver things, such as the finance people, such as the solution providers, and also the industrial water users, they're cut out of the process. So, in Madrid, we'll be hosting some sort of workshops with the UN where we can work out how that goes forward. And those tee in with this sort of big World Bank mission for water, which is very much aimed at using what they call country compacts to change the governance and regulation around water so that it becomes more investable. And in exchange for the reforms in the countries, they then can sort of get more money for projects. And I think there is this sort of line of things. First you have to establish bankability. You need to have a situation where utilities can incur debt in order to invest. And in large parts of the world, that's simply not the case, because the tariffs are too low, the operational sort of efficiency is too low, and it's not going to happen. Then once you've got the bankability, then you've got the project preparation, and then you've got the actual delivery stage. So we're working on this, and I hope that, as I say, we're sort of an actor observer in this, and that we can actually change it.
Just on that topic, and because we were talking about that blended approach of who does what and how do we position the new realm in this new constrained environment, the World Bank had this study showing that 72% of budgets are used, which means 28% of the budgets are not used, which means it sounds like it's not so much a capital problem as it is a capital execution problem, which is exactly where John's question to me resonates with. How do we use the right knowledge and competency at the right stage so that the money gets used and executed?
I'd say that the first thing is to actually have utilities which are able to do projects. I mean, this is a huge issue in a lot of countries where you have very weak management, largely politically appointed, and very little experience. And when when it comes around to actually having a banker looking at in the whites of their eyes, the banker runs away because they think, my God, this is these guys are never going to pay me back. So that's something which we're working on. I mean, I was involved in setting up this thing called the Urban Water Catalyst Initiative, which is about providing small technical assistance loans to utilities in low and middle income countries in order to turn themselves around and show that they can service debt. And the bank, together with the there's been a huge change around at the bank. They've merged with the IFC, and they will essentially take things from there in those markets. But it's not just those markets, I think, that are the problems. I mean, I think that in high income countries there remains this problem of populism and affordability issues on the one hand, and the difficulty of actually establishing the case for long-term investment when there's such uncertainty about what's really happening. And this is why I think that the idea of this sort of urgency type thing, that's what we if you're in the business, you need to be focusing on that. And certainly I suspect you'll find a lot of utility leaders find themselves fixing yesterday's problems. There's a massive drought, they go off and sort of build a desalination plant, and as soon as it's built, it gets rained off, or they sort of build a sort of huge sort of flood control system, and then they run out of water, and this is the real problem. Or they're having sort of E. coli outbreak, and then it turns out their water's full of PFAS.
Which is exactly where I wanted to go, because John, you mentioned how you're doing groundwater recharge, how you're dealing with water quality, how you're tackling all those issues. If I understand you right, yes, it might be seen as reactive somewhat, but I'm pretty sure if you're able to do that timely, it's not reactive, you're proactive. You have to be before the problem in order to anticipate what's going to happen. What's the driver to that? What makes you go at the exact tick you should? Is it because just you want to do your job right, or are there like bigger picture incentives which can be applied in other contexts?
No, that's an excellent question. So I think I mentioned we had some water quality challenges in the 1990s in Tucson. So our community ended up ultimately being very hypersensitive when it comes to water quality. So what we were able to do at Tucson is, it's probably been more than getting close to 20 years as we started an emerging contaminant reconnaissance program in our aquifer. And so we actually discovered perfluorinated compounds at significant concentrations back in 2008. And we started to bring that information to our community, to our authorizing public, our elected officials. So when perfluorinated compounds started to become more of a topic by the mid 2010s, 2016, 2017, when regulations changed in the US, in Southern Arizona, we already had a good idea of what was occurring, and we were able to make immediate reactions associated with not only protecting water quality for the customers, but bringing information to the customers about these non-regulated compounds very early on. And what that ended up doing is it ended up building that earned trust with the utility, that we were doing things that was not asked for to protect the water quality. And when that trust was earned with the community, they support us, and then they've been supporting us on and encouraging us to stay ahead, stay on the advance, look out for things that are out there in our environment that may not be regulated today, because we want you to continue to protect us for tomorrow. And so that's something we've been able to earn.
I think the lessons learned here is what you're sharing in every of the aspects is information is the key. If everybody's informed, then very probably the right decisions are going to be taken, just because it's in human nature to not want to drink bad quality water if you have the information that it is bad quality, and so far and so on. So it reflects on all the stages.
Exactly, and to share that information, and by 2016, our authorizing public, through our mayor and council here in Tucson, they didn't like the fact that there was only a few laboratories in the United States that could run PFAS analysis, and it would take 4 to 8 weeks to understand what the concentrations were. So they directed the utility to invest in the laboratory equipment, to outfit our water quality lab, to do research on emerging contaminants, so we could have a 24 to 48 hour turnaround on compounds like PFAS. So you bring the information out there and you're transparent, you earn the credibility from your community, and then they empower you to do the right thing moving forward.
Dave, I didn't want to make you feel like I forgot you because I still have that curveball for you. When you created XPV in 2006, so roughly 20 years ago, you were addressing a certain section of the market and a certain investment vision. And if I follow your path, that has evolved several times, taken turns, and I feel like when we discuss urgency, when we discuss issues, when we discuss all of that, as an investor, it sounds like an asymmetric bet. So somewhat, it's much better than a situation where everything is perfect. So I'm wondering, when you see all these changes and rapid evolution of the market, does that mean that you're also evolving the way you tackle this as an investor?
Yeah, so I'd say any good investor is always adjusting their strategies to reality. And I think one of the realities, and I'll sort of maybe try to tie together some of the comments that John and Ellie are making, and that is the one thing I've learned over my investment career, and I'm not just talking water, is sometimes it's very hard to see the change at the edge, right? Because it's usually scattered out there. It's not necessarily announced everywhere. And so one of the reasons we came up with some of these themes like flexibility, agility, and all the rest of it is what we're seeing at the edge. And if you dig into some of XPV investments, and Metron certainly falls in this, is we're seeing a change in which, for example, utilities can make decisions. So historically, your decision as a utility was an all for nothing decision, right? We have to build this big infrastructure, it's big dollars, it goes through a big process and all the rest of it. The change now, and by the way, this is the evolution of technology from outside the industry coming in, and AI is part of that, but certainly telecom and all the rest of that, is you can do incremental change, right? And so, for example, Metron, uses wireless communication for its devices, and you can put in 1 Metron unit or you can put in 1,000 Metron units, but you still get the same value proposition. And what that means is utilities now don't have to do a wholesale change to start getting results. By the way, smart cover was in the same category as that. So I think part of the challenge when we start to say like about ratepayers and the old model, the way of doing things versus what's happening at the edge and the flexibility, agility, I think they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. They're connected, and I think sometimes it's dangerous to hang on to what's happening in the old ways because you start to miss what's happening in the new ways. So I think there's an incrementalism that's happening now that's available to the water world that probably wasn't there 20, 30 years ago. The second piece, which AI certainly plays into, but again, it's all the IoT infrastructure that's in and around our world, is suddenly now we're shifting from a guessing world to an accurate world. And that's another big change, right? And John, you just mentioned it, right? Hey, like we want to know within 48 hours what's in the PFAS, right? Eventually it's going to go real time, right? What's happening real time in the water, right? Ellie talked about Metron, like they can tell if your toilet's running or you're filling your pool or different things like that. Like suddenly you're going from a guesswork. So if you're a utility manager, it's much more powerful to know what the water is being used for versus sort of this blind big bill going up and they have no idea what's happening. That's another big change that happened. And all of those things, by the way, change behavior, right? And that's a big thing that I think, at least we're seeing at XPV, is we're seeing a behavioral change. And anytime I've ever invested in any sector, when you start to see behavioral changes, that's where you start to see really exciting opportunities, and you usually see accelerated growth. And certainly we're seeing our companies that are in these areas of flexibility, agility, credibility, we're certainly seeing high levels of growth.
That behavioral change is also happening at the investor level, right? With more players in your lane, in other lanes with different types. And I guess it's more synergistic than it is competition, right?
Yeah, listen, in the investment world, we often use a word called coopetition. In other words, on many levels, we cooperate, and many times, sometimes there's odd time you're competing for a deal, right? But most of the investment world, certainly in the private side, like when you think of venture and growth and private equity, it's more cooperative than it is competitive. What I'm kind of excited about, and I talk to all of my colleagues, out there about this that are investing in the water sector, is we are starting to see a bit of a food chain develop, which is very important to the sector, right? One of the biggest challenges from a financial perspective or a finance investing perspective, say 20 years ago, is If you were a venture, you were on your own. Right now we have venture, and venture guys are raising growth funds, and now we have more private equity coming in. That's a very healthy thing and a very healthy ecosystem for water in general. And again, I think it's all part of that change that we're seeing.
I promised you prior to launching the webinar that I would behave and be a good cautious of your time. So that's the moment where I have to control myself and stop pushing. I have a lightning round for all of you. Just in one sentence after that hour of presentation, what is the one change a utility leader should make to their strategy tomorrow based on the urgency we discussed? Dave, you were the last to speak, so be the first to answer that one.
I'd say watch for the incremental opportunities. It's not all about, absolute.
Incremental opportunity, Christopher?
Communication, I think, is the thing. I mean, we need to get this message out there, and I hope that we can, use the UN conference at the end of the year to really make this the #1 issue in the world, so that people understand. They take that big global message and understand how it works in their local situation, so that they are supportive of the investment that needs to happen.
John, I feel like Christopher stole your communication, so you have to find another one.
All right, I'm going to pivot really quick because I'm good like that. Courage. So related to communication, utility leaders have to have the courage to have the hard conversations early with their communities that they serve, and it'll pay dividends in the end.
Ellie, you have the toughest spots because now you have to find something that all the three didn't say.
Oh, this is easy. You left my lane wide open. You have to have really good, high quality data about your whole system and be able to put all of the pieces together to actually underscore and make happen everything that Dave, Chris, and John just pulled forward and described.
Christopher's website for the Global Water Summit is Water Meets Money, so we have to take money sides as well. And I'll start with you, Ellie, this time. What's the one thing, so same question, but for an investor this time?
Oh, there is a very simple translation from gallons to dollars. And that drives behavior from consumers all the way up to investors. And you have to tell the story well. It's about using the units that matter to the people who are making the decision.
John?
Yeah, just I agree with Ellie. I can't think of it. I'm not that quick. I can't.
Granted, no problem. Christopher? Oh no, wait. Let me leave you for the end, Christopher. Dave.
I'm going to say I think we've hit a major inflection point. We've gone from an out of sight, out of mind problem to in your face, which changes everything.
And Christopher, last to speak. It's also the right segue for us to talk about your call to action.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that the world of investment has changed. I mean, I think we've probably, got past sort of peak impact of AI on the stock market. I think that I think there's been a sort of huge amount of sort of thinking about how that's going to be. I think one of the wonderful things about water is that although AI does help, ultimately it's a heavy thing, and it's a great hedge against everything else that might go on in the world. And this is it's a great investment. As a result, it's an essential, it should be an essential part of everyone's portfolio to invest in water. And I feel that for the last 4 years, our GWI index has sort of underperformed. That's the index of water stocks, and I hope that I think that this is the moment that where it changes around and water investment starts overtaking the rest of the economy.
So, want to hedge your investments, invest in water. In one sentence, Christopher, is that your tagline for Madrid?
I don't know. I mean, thinking about investment. I mean, I don't know. The other story which is going on is this retreat from sustainability, which is a very interesting trend. I mean, I wrote something last week about how something like 1.28 trillion dollars had gone into sustainability funds over the past 8 years or so. And last year, for the first time, money came out of those funds. And I think that, you know, we need to, this is an opportunity for water to sort of reposition what its message is, you know, rather than saying, yeah, we're part of this whole, you know, energy climate change thing, that there is a separate investment story built around water security, which is becoming super urgent at the moment.
Thanks to the four of you. Just rapid fire answers to the questions in the chat. Will the SARs be shared? Yes, and all of that is present in the white paper, which is written by Dave and Christopher on the left of my screen. So you probably want to have a look at the white paper. There were some good questions which I could not take because they were slightly off topic. You will get answers directly in the aftermath of the webinar. And aside from that, people are saying thank you to the four of you, and I'm going to join the chat and saying thank you to all of you, and look forward to see the sequel of the sequel in 2 years.
That's great.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, guys.
Thank you all.